We do have dinner. So it's in the oven warming.
How was your episode? Well, it was 3.5 hours long, but
the wives finally went out and ate. But we lost them about midnight.
About midnight, yeah.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
In the studio here today, Nashville, Tennessee. Drove all the way from Santa Fe,
Santa Fe,
Tennessee.
That's right.
Which is actually quite the journey.
It's not as far as I thought it was going to be. And of course, you get on the interstate and time drags because it's so crazy down here. But yeah, so about maybe an hour or so. Of course, you have to stop and get treats for the dog. So when we come home, we have something for her because she'll be by herself for 4 hours. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, I know that the last time I visited your and your lovely wife's place and had dinner, I think I turned left when I should have turned right. And it was dark, 9.
So you did make it home, though, because I'm sitting here in front of you, so I know that you did make it out of there.
It was quite the journey.
My children have never forgiven us for buying that place. We love it, and we're really happy about it. But we're up in the hills. Just so to give you a sort of a perspective, the nearest gas station is 14 miles away. So you have to plan your days around everything. And leaving the property is a thing.
It's not like, hey, I'm going to run down the corner store and get something.
Doesn't work that way.
Yeah, the corner store's 30 minutes away.
Exactly.
In the studio with us today, someone I'm consider a friend. We've gotten to know each other over the last couple of years. Jack Sharkey is in the studio. A Jersey boy.
Jersey boy. Yeah, you'll hear it come out. I can't hide it.
He's a wise guy, but not the wise guy that you think he is.
No.
He's wise in information
and I'm wise
knowledge.
in how I act around wise guys, too.
Yeah.
So I'm from Jersey.
I think we all are that way, yeah. And for those of you watching the video, he brought this lovely bottle of Jefferson's bourbon, which, by the way,
cheers.
We're enjoying.
Yeah, it's delicious.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, this is a super pleasure. I'm excited, just thrilled.
So the conversation you and I had over dinner a few months ago was, let's talk about something that just truly interests us. Mm-hmm. And you and I are both, well, we're classic rock aficionados. I think I can be safe in saying that about both you and I. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a child of the 70s. I was in junior high and high school in the 70s. And I thought that was literally the best music ever.
And if it wasn't the best music ever, because the argument could be made, it was the best time ever. I sit there and I think sometimes I remember the week that Boston's first record came out, just off the top of my head, and what an amazing thing that was, and how we knew when that record launched that it was huge and it was a great record, and then every week going to the record store on Wednesdays was because that's when he'd get his new stock, and you get to know the guy at the record store. What do you got for me, Jimmy? Well, Jimmy might have this, he might have that, and it's sad. I'm a streaming guy. I love technology. I am not afraid of technology in any way, but we've lost some things. And we've lost that sense of community, that sense of being all in it together. It was us against them, particularly in the later 70s, like when punk came out and new wave came out, which was a little bit more of when I had graduated high school and all, and it was ours. It belonged to us. The media hadn't caught up with it yet, that whole thing. So yeah, I think we've missed some things or in the course of this movement in technology.
I think the other thing, too, that was so different back in the 70s compared to today is Southern California boy. Go to Tower Records. Tower Records on Sunset Boulevard.
It's a pilgrimage for me. It was, yeah.
You could spend literally hours in there, hours going through the bins of, not only your favorite artists, but and because of the album cover artwork. Now, I have a friend who does a podcast, Mindy Peterson does a podcast out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And her show's more of a holistic approach. But she had someone on the show that talked about the album cover design artwork.
Right.
And I remember as a kid, 1971, seeing the Santana Abraxas album cover.
It's an amazing record album cover.
I hadn't even heard the album, and I said, I got to buy the album just because of this cover.
Right.
So when you went into Tower Records in the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, you would go through the bins, and if something visually caught your interest, then it's got to be as good musically as it is artistically from a visual perspective.
And I have a story that's just a little bit slightly different to that. It involves Kansas. I love Kansas. Kansas is a great band. The first album with John Brown on the cover in the storm and the whole bit, and it's just a wild album cover. And I would go, and I would go to the record store, and I would hold it in my hands, and I would look at it. I didn't know anything about the band. This was before they broke, right? And it intimidated me. I was like, I don't know that this music is for me, because this album art is so cool. But I had been reading Circus magazine and whatever the magazine was at the time, and Kansas was that was the flavor of the day.
Yeah.
So I was pulled to buy it, but I never pulled the trigger to buy the album because I thought it was too high of a level of whatever. I can't even explain it to you now.
This from a guy who listens to Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery.
Right? And picked that up, blind. I looked at it. It was like, oh, I have to have this record. Yeah, and to this day, what's funny is I own every other Kansas album on vinyl that they released up until 1980, except for that one. And I basically wired my brain to sort of just be intimidated by that record. I've heard the record. I streamed the record. It's a wonderful album.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of the same thing. Like you'd see a record, go, I have to have this immediately. And then in my case, I had to see, here's a band that I think I'm going to fall in love with, but I'm kind of afraid to buy it because the album is a little too artsy for me, or whatever it was.
No, I kind of get that. Yeah. I think there were a few like the Tubes.
Yeah.
I think the Knack, some of those albums I'd look at and I'd go, that might be a bit extreme for me.
Right.
But that's okay because it's still, even though there's a partition there of maybe I'm going to purchase, maybe I'm not, but at least okay, if I'm not going to get that one, then I'm going to go take a chance with, this one.
Yeah.
And whatever that album would be. Now, you mentioned Kansas or Boston. Now, of course, when Boston came out and you heard that Tom Schultz had recorded and produced 90% of the...
In his basement.
Yeah. Back before you had auto-tune and pitch correction and Pro Tools. And I went, that's got to be a gutsy album.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy that one.
And you bought it and you put it on and you heard that first guitar. And then when I heard the hi-hats that first time when he does those little triplets on the hi-hats.
Because you're a drummer.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm hooked. This is it. This is a great record. And that goes back to how we opened is that's a time that doesn't exist anymore. Because I remember I think I was 15 when that album came out. I'm not sure, 15, 16, whatever, high school age, right? And you felt like you had discovered something, like an explorer. You had discovered something nobody knew. And then the cool thing when you're a kid is when all of a sudden the album is, number 1 or number 5 or whatever it turned into. You're like, yeah, I've been listening to that for 6 months or whatever, right? And it gave you this sort of this cool edge that you were ahead of everybody a little bit, which is something that I love about the music industry today. Except the problem is it's all cool edge because it's all stuff that nobody's heard yet.
Right. You talk about something that has become maybe not so much genre specific, but niche specific. Yeah. That there is so much great music out there, but the audience has been diluted because it's subgenre of subgenre of subgenre.
Right.
And it's tough to get into an artist because there's so much music out there anymore. I think that loyal fan base, like Chicago for me.
Right.
I bought every one of their first 9 or 10 albums. I
Right.
couldn't wait for it to come out. Santana was the same way. Grand Funk Railroad.
There's another one.
Yeah.
I remember my mom, I overheard her talking to my father at Christmas time. And she had bought E Pluribus Funk, which if you look it up, Google it, it was round and it was like a coin.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember her showing my father. Now, my father was a musician and my mother was she was a hipster. Like, she was into music, right? And being so thrilled and excited that she bought this record. And I'm kind of in my mind going, yeah, for as much as my parents are on me constantly, they're pretty cool if that's what you're talking about. But I actually... And this strategy, kids, did not work for me, but I tried it, and I cringe a little bit when I think about it. I would bring, along with other people, you'd bring albums to school to kind of, impress a girl, just have it there or whatever. There's no reason, right? But it was just this thing. And even as I'm telling you the story, I'm a little embarrassed that this was what I did, but we all did it. And by the way, it never worked. It never worked. So whatever. Yeah.
But it was a great way to share music with other people no matter what.
Yeah. I know I have albums out there that I bought that I lent to, this friend or that friend. And I also know that I have albums that just suddenly arrived in my collection because, for the same thing. And it was a way of life. Of course, we had nothing else to do,
You didn't have the 500 channels of television. You didn't have the internet at your disposal.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had football games, and back then we had football games on Saturday afternoons, not even Friday nights in New Jersey, right? And I didn't go to football games. I didn't do anything in high school. I had nothing else to do. And
did you have high school dance bands back then?
Yes. And in fact, that's how I cut my teeth playing. Was we actually got busy to the point when I was a junior and senior in high school, we were working almost every weekend. This high school, doing this prom, doing this, and playing dances all the time. And it was wonderful. In fact, great story as a drummer. And if my former bandmates ever hear this, I still apologize for it. Stairway to Heaven. And there was this absolutely stunning girl that decided that, yes, she would dance with me. This was a big deal. And they had to go around and around 4 times.
So you walked off the stage to dance with the girl.
Yes, I did. And I'm sorry to admit that, but that's what happened.
No, that's priceless.
And I would do it again because she was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Never saw her after that. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? But I do think I might have been kicked out of the band shortly after that for that.
I think there's a reason for that, yeah. I remember back in my high school days, it was a big thing if your rock and roll band, your garage band, got chosen to perform not only at because we had Friday night school dances where we were at, but then you had your Christmas formal and you had your junior, senior prom. And if you got hired to play those, and I remember, I think a 2-hour high school dance was maybe $120.
Right.
And I had like 7 guys in my band.
I was just in a trio, so it was easy.
Yeah. Here's your $3.
Yeah.
Or if we played a formal, it might have been like $180, something like that. But it was the prestige of it all.
You were a little bit of a rock star in school, and it was a big deal, especially like if I was in a school that was all about football and was all about wrestling. I didn't do sports, right? I liked sports, but I wasn't good at it, right? So it gave you another opportunity to kind of be somebody rather than just kind of hiding away in the corner. And it was, it was great. And then, I didn't join marching band. And one of the biggest regrets I have is that I never did. But the reason why I didn't join marching band was because I was a rock and roller. And I did rock and roll. That's what and so it was a whole, talk about niches, it was a whole societal niche. And then our Knights of Columbus in town would host dances every Friday night. And so we had the high schools that we would be playing, and we were traveling around the area. And then we almost literally had like a stand, like we were the house band at the Knights of Columbus every Friday night for about a year and a half. And you'd play with other bands and you'd meet people, and it was a glorious time. We were kind of on our own a little bit. Parents didn't. They were, they'd actually begrudgingly drive you in the Country Squire station wagon with your gear to drop you off, right?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, and then
with the wood paneling on the side,
man. Yeah. And my mother would grouse, or my older brother, who would be forced to come pick us up at 11 or 12 o'clock, and before we had our driver's licenses, and all. But and that's one thing. I hope I can, School of Rock, I think, hurts kids a little bit because, we would get in a garage and we would scrounge up instruments and stuff like that. And it was us figuring out if we were good or not.
Right.
We didn't have any. We had no mentors.
And you had no sound system. You just got in there and turned on the amps. In fact, when I first started playing, I plugged my microphone into my bass guitar amp.
That's exactly what we did.
And it was a Hilgen single 15-inch.
Yeah.
I think they called it a basso or a basso.
Yeah.
I wish I still had it. And I remember, like, your vocals were like,
oh yeah,
but
there's no pop to anything.
You didn't care,
No.
'cause...
And people thought you sounded great. And if you could play, they loved you. And if you couldn't play, they didn't love you.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful experience because it forced us to be good. It forced us to work hard at it, and it forced us to make a ton of mistakes. So by the time I was 18 or 19, I'm working in bars full time and playing because the drinking age was different, right?
Yeah.
And making, at that point, then you start actually making some money. Granted, I grew up on the Jersey Shore at a time when the clubs were hopping. So I was maybe at best at that point like a C-level band, right? Doing, Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. We weren't doing the Saturday nights.
Right.
But you're making decent money. And it was a lifestyle, and it was really a lot of fun. And having to do it on our own made it even all the better. We cherished it more because, School of Rock, or even like Little League Baseball now. It's like, how much more fun did you have playing ball in a field with your buddies after school than you did at Little League, especially nowadays because everybody takes it so seriously.
Yeah.
We took nothing serious.
And everybody gets a participation trophy, too. Yeah.
And sometimes you just, sometimes you get kicked out of bands because maybe you were dancing with a girl you shouldn't have been dancing with, right? Or maybe you weren't good. And then you had to figure out, well,
am I going to keep doing this or not?
Yeah, am I going to get better or am I going to quit?
Yeah.
And there's nothing in the world wrong with that. Nothing in the world wrong with that. And, and that's why I will hold to this theory that it'll never happen again because money got involved and parents got involved and whatever it is. But it all goes back to what we originally spoke about was the record store. It's going to the record store and just sitting there. And, I had, I can remember playing we played an 8th grade graduation dance. I was a sophomore in high school. I made $50. And I spent 45 of it on albums. And again, now albums at that point were $4.
Yeah.
$5, right? And I treasured...
Unless you did Columbia House.
Yeah,
and
that's
then it was
true.
a penny and you could get,
I got so many of those.
13,
Yeah. I would write my father's name down and my mother's name down. I didn't care. I was getting free albums, at this point. Right?
The kids listening to the show today are going to go, what are they talking about?
Where are these?
What is this Columbia House that they mentioned?
They're like from outer space, these people. And sometimes I feel like we're a little bit out of outer space.
Yeah.
Because it's just so different now. And I will be the last person, particularly of my age, to bemoan technology. I love technology. I'm all about it. But we have to learn to work with technology so we don't take the magic away from things, and we don't take away that, there was nothing more fun than you get an album, you go over to a friend's house or whatever, and you're shooting pool down in the basement, and everybody had the basement, bars and stuff downstairs and listening to the first, the Deep Purple album when it came out or whatever it was. And it was a thing and it was important and we shared that. I don't worry, but I sort of feel bad for people that aren't going to be able to have those same memories going forward because they're part of my life. And as I, reach that other end of life, I'm really happy I have them. I wouldn't trade those for the world.
In the studio with us here in Nashville, Tennessee, Jack Sharkey. We're going to take a break, get a word in for one of our sponsors. And while we do, I'm going to pour some more of this Jefferson's bourbon that so graciously made its way to our podcast.
If anybody from Jefferson's is listening, it's good bourbon.
Yeah, it's very good.
Pay attention to us here.
Hey, everybody, this is Lori Morgan. I want you to check out my program on the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena. And believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives. Whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Jack Sharkey across the podcast table. We should give a shout out, obviously, to your gainful employer, which is KEF Speakers.
Yes.
We have talked about them on the past on the podcast, and I think they're great speakers, by the way. And someday when I grow up, I hope to be able to afford a pair. But great speakers. And I say that because we actually, my wife and I, we spent some time in your music room at your house.
Yeah, I have a little theater down there. Yeah.
In Santa Fe, Tennessee. Yeah. And I remember you saying, so what do you want to listen to?
Yeah.
And Debbie and I kept taking turns, well, I want to hear this album, or I want to hear that. And I mean, it was mind-blowing, but I digress. When we talk about classic music, classic rock, maybe I shouldn't say classic music because we don't want to talk about Beethoven or Bach or Mozart, but when we talk about classic rock, in your mind, when did you think it started? Was there a certain year or was there a certain artist?
Yeah, it starts with Rubber Soul. For me, it starts with Rubber Soul and it ends with Nevermind by Nirvana. That sort of 27 years is classic rock to me. And I actually can give an argument as to why. Rubber Soul is the album that became, it wasn't about singles. And it let us know that the Beatles were going to be something new and exciting. And the music on there and the production on there and the whole bit. And then, you have Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's and Pet Sounds, and all those albums come from that. So that sort of starts it for me. And then you kind of peak at Frampton Comes Alive is where I see the peak. Because with Frampton Comes Alive, that's when the big money came in.
Yeah.
Not that there wasn't money, but that's when the big money came in.
That was about
76.
76.
Right? Came out in January 76. And by summer 76, the only thing that mattered was Frampton Comes Alive. That was it.
Which that album just... It came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember a lot of people going, who is this Peter Frampton?
Yeah. Some of us knew who he was.
Yeah.
Humble Pie and Frampton's Camel, great band, some great guitar player, but he was not a superstar by any stretch of the imagination. So that's your peak there. And then, I have a friend who was in a band who had been picked up. John Kolodner was their A&R guy. And John, if you ever watch the Aerosmith video, he's the guy with the hair and the glasses and the whole bit. He's a brilliant genius of a guy. And he was assigned to this band. And I'm not going to name them. They're out of England. They're a heavy metal band, a great band. They do really well for themselves. And they were they were brought over to the U.S. to do a tour and stuff in August of 91 and in September of 91. And then Nirvana dropped Nevermind, second album. It wasn't their debut album. And they to hear the guys in that band talk about it, it was over for them. Their career was over at that point because we went from glam rock and spandex and the big hair and that whole thing overnight to a completely different music. I think it was a wonderful thing because I love when things get shook up, when things get changed.
Yeah.
But anything that happened in rock and roll after that album was just sort of a retread. You have Appetite for Destruction and Guns N' Roses, right, which was the last great heavy rock album. And then 3 years later, Kiss It All Goodbye. That's not at all to say that there's not great music and great rock and roll music out there.
Once again, this is where I age myself. To me, I think the litmus test is when I compare albums to other albums.
Okay.
The most simplistic road to go down. It's easy. Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay.
And let's get back to a time when, once again, no Pro Tools, no pitch correction, no auto-tune, no nothing.
Tape loops, man.
Tape loops. And these guys created a musical masterpiece. And I say that because I remember sophomore, junior in high school, headphones on late at night in my bedroom. I think I'm laying on the floor and I'm listening to this. And, you know, when all the alarm bells go off.
Yeah.
And I remember just jumping out of my skin, but I went, holy crap, these guys have created a
what
great
just
album.
happened here?
Yeah. And then I think the next one was a few years later, 75, I think it was, Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow.
Fantastic album.
Now, I was a big Jeff Beck fan anyway.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, this album came out, and it came at a very pivotal point in my life. I had just broken up with my girlfriend from high school. You know, my heart's broken.
Yeah.
And there's this Stevie Wonder song on there called "'Cause We've Ended as Lovers."
Yep.
And I think I wore that, that one out in itself. But at the same time, I realized, and of course, when you look at it, Sir George Martin had produced that album.
Right.
So, there you go back to the Rubber Soul and all the Beatles. You know. It's hard for me to find albums that can even compare to that music.
Right.
I think they're out there, and I think there are some that have come close. But I don't think artists, and I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but I don't think artists have spent the time in the studio to create like those guys did back then.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Yeah.
10cc. Motion picture show.
Yeah.
You know, I'm Not in Love, which was the big hit. I remember reading an article where they said they had one room. It was just a room full of different tape loops, you know, to try and get the sound that they wanted to get. And that kind of experimentation, I think, may have gone, by the time Prince had passed away, because he was also one of those guys really going out there and trying something a little avant-garde.
See, and the argument then could be made that the accountants and the bean counters became much more prevalent. And then I will bring this back to Frampton Comes Alive, because that's when that's when I think the accountants became more important than the A&R guys, and more important than spending money. Except you had some time in the 90s where they were kind of free with cash and stuff, but they didn't give you the opportunity to just go in the studio. And of course, when you're Pink Floyd, you say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
We're this big. You can't tell us what to do. We're going to go in the studio. If it takes us 18 months to do a record, it takes us 18 months.
And the Beatles were that way, and Led Zeppelin was that way, and Deep Purple, and
And we are better off for that. And so, note to bean counters, we're talking about albums that are at least 40, if not 50 years old at this point, that I think anybody, regardless of what age they are that's listening to this podcast right now, is almost intimately familiar with these records.
Or should be.
Yeah. So that says something really huge to me about that particular time. You get tagged, it's old fogey music, it's this, that, and the other thing. Okay, I'm not going to argue with you on that. But it's also classic music at this point, too, because it's still here.
But here's where I'm going to disagree with that analogy that they would throw at you. It's old folky music. Mm-hmm. Okay. Make me a deal.
Right.
Here's the deal. Put some headphones on, sit in a dark room, no lights, and listen to that album, and then come back to me and say it's old folky music.
Right.
Because the thing that I miss musically is that musical journey. When you drop the needle on the vinyl or you hit play on the CD player, you knew it was this musical journey that was going to take you from point A to point B, but in the process, you went down all these different winding roads. Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees was a great album for
Wonderful
that.
record, yeah.
Michael Jackson's Thriller. Of course, we said Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, Santana, Abraxas. There were so many great albums that took you on that musical journey. Led Zeppelin, when they came out with Stairway to Heaven, you couldn't get away with that anymore because you couldn't play a song on the radio that long. 7 minutes and some odd seconds.
Yeah.
Radio wouldn't do it. I had a buddy at an AM radio station because, yes, back in the days,
AM.
we listened to AM radio.
Yeah.
FM was really the mom and dads. They'd play the Montevani and
I was going to say
Henry
Montevani.
Mancini,
That's exactly right.
Bronte and Teicher.
Yeah.
That was, it was the Lawrence Welk music was FM. And I remember listening to our local rock station, and and I knew the DJ, and he would put on Stairway to Heaven because it was 7 minutes and some odd seconds long, and it took him 3 minutes to leave the studio and go down to the corner to the liquor store and buy a can of beer and get or a 6-pack of beer.
That's how Freebird became such a big hit. But you see, the common thread we're talking about with these is it's an album. It's a journey. When you said journey, it's the most brilliant way to put it, because you'd start on the first track and you go all the way through, and like a Japanese tea ceremony, you'd get up, you have to flip the record over, and you go back and you sit down and you listen to the other record. And it
you
took
weren't
you
in a hurry.
No, you had 44 minutes roughly that you were going to spend listening to that, and it gave you a chance to think, to imagine, to pretend, to wonder what they were thinking about, to get lost in the album art or whatever it was. And it was wonderful because it gave you a different experience rather than having sort of images. I'm not a big video fan and a big sort of non fiction fan for reading, because I want my own ideas. I want to watch my own pictures in my head. Yes, folks, I'm not crazy. That's what I want to do.
But you're right. You want to hear the music, and it translates visually in your brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you could say, well, you're getting Jimmy Page and Robert Plant's thoughts in your head. Well, okay, they're providing a canvas for me to go somewhere. And that could only be achieved in an album. And then, of course, when CDs came out, and then we went from 44 minutes to 80 minutes, it ruined it to me. Because all of a sudden, again, the bean counters, sorry, they were like, well, wait, we have 40 minutes of unused bits. We have to use these bits up. It's like, oh, no, the bits don't cost us anything.
Yeah.
Well, we have to use that space.
And you started creating albums that had maybe 1 or 2 or 3 great songs on it, and the rest of it was filler.
Right.
I'm going to be real careful here. When I was at a certain record label, and I worked at more than one, so you guys fight it out amongst yourselves. Well, I was at a certain record label, one of several that I worked at, and I remember that we used to call the accounting department and the legal department success prevention.
Success prevention is brilliant. Oh, my goodness.
Because we would go with this great artistic idea, because, I was manager of artist development and working with A&R guys, and, we have all these, and the bean counters are like going, not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Yeah.
And I thought, so we're going to release an album that's going to have 2 or 3 songs that are really, really, really good, and then fill the rest of it with just fluff.
Yeah.
Because you just want to get an album out there to sell.
Right.
And what you said, when you go back to the albums that you and I have described individually, 40 years later, 45 years later, 5 decades that are still selling.
Right. They're still important. I can have a conversation with a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or 40-year-old, and they'll go, oh yeah, I of course I know Dark Side of the Moon. Of course I know Led Zeppelin 4 or whatever it is. So that's why it's such a special time. And as much as I miss it, I'm glad it will never happen again, because future generations deserve to have that as part of their musical history or their musical lexicon or whatever. Just no different than Beethoven and Bach and Brahms and all. That music is still here 200 years later. You can still get lost in a Vivaldi piece like it was something you've never heard before.
And Vivaldi, that came out, 1700, 1600, something like that?
Right?
Yeah, a long time ago.
And so, it's very easy for us to sit here and think, literally 400 or 500 years from now, that people will be discussing Stairway to Heaven. Yeah. That doesn't mean that anything else is not good. And it doesn't mean that, like Houndmouth or Pickwick or some of the newer bands, Wild Feathers, to name a few new bands who are doing some really great things, are not valid and good bands. What it means is they unfortunately didn't hit that sweet spot of time.
At a time.
At the time. That's what it was all about. Which is exciting. It should be a history lesson for people, because it's a cultural moment.
That is a great way to explain it. This should be a musical history lesson. There should be classes taught on this.
Yeah, because it's not being selfish. Well, my time was better than your time. Okay, my music was better. I'm not saying my music was better than anybody else's music. What I'm saying is there was a whole thing that was happening at that time that had direct connection to politics and direct connection to culture and all of this stuff that can never happen again because maybe the wrong people are involved, and certainly technology has changed that terribly.
Yeah.
I hope there's a kid out there listening right now that goes, oh yeah, well, watch what I'm going to do. Right?
I hope so too.
Yeah, and he changes or she changes the paradigm. And then as an old guy, I get to watch a bunch of 20-year-olds going, yeah, we're doing. Bring it, man. That would be fantastic. And I think you don't get to that without talking about what it was. If we just ignore it, or we kind of poo-poo it because it's old or whatever it is, I think we lose an opportunity for a young person to sit there and go, okay, watch this. Yeah.
In the studio with us today here in Nashville, Tennessee, Jack Sharkey.
Hey, this is Gary Chapman, and you are listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Jack Sharkey, KEF speaker guy.
Yeah.
We'll call you that. But,
yeah.
But we're talking about things that are on more of a personal note, what you and I are passionate about.
Yeah.
If you had only, okay, let me back up and say this. You're on a deserted island.
Okay.
You have a record player.
Okay.
And you have the choice of one album and
one?
one album
One.
only. One album only.
That's absurd.
Okay. I'm sorry. My game, my rules.
That's true. I'm in your room. I have to play. Yeah.
Yeah. My circus, my monkeys. Okay. See what happens when we start drinking
Yes,
whiskey?
it's Jefferson's bourbon again. Yeah. Wow, one album.
You get one. Well, okay, maybe I should say it this way. Was there one album that impacted you more than any other?
Yeah, there actually was.
Okay, so that would be the one you would take on the deserted island.
And that was Eat a Peach. There's no doubt.
Really?
That was Eat a Peach. It came at a time in my life, that was...
I remember the album cover alone going,
yeah, what is this?
I got to buy it just because that album cover.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And you open up and you look at the artwork in the middle and you're like, where did this come from? But the music was sad and it was dark, but it was optimistic and it was beautiful, and it was just this thing. Even as I talk about it now, I get that little bit of a rush, that little bit of a magic in my heart beating about what a wonderful time it was. I was a young kid, and I mean, I didn't even pick up on that album until it had already been out 3 or 4 years. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't,
But that was the sign of a really good album.
Yeah, just waited.
That could stand that duration of still being good.
Yeah, and I have physical memories, and what I mean by that is like I can think about it, or I can listen to the music, and it brings me right back to my bedroom in the fall. And I lived in a very rural area. I could hear the duck hunters out on the river, and listening to Les Brère and A minor, and the whole thing. And it sunk its teeth into me. Like no other record really did. It's close because I could list off 5 or 6 other albums that kind of.
I think we both could.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. But Eat a Peach was the one. It's been with me the longest, and it's never let me down as a record. I put it on right now and go right back to that place or go to wherever I happen to be, and it's a magical record that way. And that's so, if I had to go on a desert island with one album, which is, again, really hard to do, it would absolutely be Eat a Peach. Yeah. What about you? What would be your one album?
This is where I get to fudge just a little bit because it was a double album.
Well, so was Eat a Peach, but okay, yeah.
Chicago Transit Authority.
Wonderful
their
record.
very first album.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, Los Angeles KABC TV would promote their news hour, leading up to it in the late afternoons before they break to local news at 5. And they had this one kind of horn thing that went on, dun, 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 dun. And I went, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Right.
And then a buddy of mine, I was cheap as a kid. My wife will tell you I'm cheap now, but I was cheap as a kid. A friend of mine was having a birthday party, and I thought, I'll just get him an album. Mm-hmm. And I saw this record that on the back, in big letters, Chicago Transit Authority, but you turn it around on the front, and there's just the little logo of Chicago.
Right.
And I said, you know what, I'll do that, and I'll stick a bow right there, Here, happy birthday. And I hadn't listened to the album yet. So, during his birthday party, we put the album on and listened to it, and I went, there's that horn part I've been hearing on KABC TV, Los Angeles. Yeah. Next day, I'm out and I go to the local Montgomery wards. So back in those days, we call them the monkey wards. And I picked that album and I took it home and I went, this is life-changing. Now, I've had other life-changing albums.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tower of Power, What Is Hip?
Yeah.
Grand Funk Railroad, Survival.
Okay.
Those types of albums. I said Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow. Mm-hmm. But Chicago Transit Authority, the very first one. Sorry, that's our dog Lucy down. And she's not even the music dog in the studio. For those that are listening, it's our dog Lucy barking. But Chicago Transit Authority double album. Now, there were probably one or two songs, especially one, Terry Kath, Freeform Guitar, that I went, it's a bit of a stretch for
much.
me. Yeah,
okay.
Bit of a stretch. But, when they went into the one song with the chant in the beginning, the whole world is watching, the whole world is watching, I just remember going, these guys are laying down a message that I don't even begin to understand, but I'm going to figure it out.
Wasn't that awesome?
Yeah.
Yeah. I got that from when London Calling came out. I was in college when the Clash was...
Yeah.
And so, I kind of dug the reggae bits of it, and I was kind of into punk and new wave at the time. And then I sat back and I listened to it. I was like, wait a minute. They're talking about stuff that, like you just said, I do not understand it. I want to understand it, because if they're this passionate about it, they're writing music about it and playing about it. And, and that's a double-edged sword, because sometimes you go into areas where, maybe it's dangerous or it's not. But that's the power of good music. It makes you think, makes you go to places. And it's a wonderful responsibility that an artist has. But at the end of the day, the listener needs to sort of know what's going on. But that album was one that was life-changing for me in that sense, as an older college-age person, not as a teenager at that point.
I think the music has to speak to you for you to be in love with it. I think there's nothing wrong with falling in love with the music.
No.
If you fall in love with the artist, you might want to go get some help.
A little bit different.
Yeah.
You're a little bit different.
But falling in love with the music is okay. And you'll fall out of love. I remember some later projects out of some other artists that I had really grown passionate about. They would release something and I'd go, okay.
You missed the mark.
It's time to move on. Yeah. I remember Little Feat released Day at the Dog Races.
Okay.
And I went, oh my gosh, this is like, I'm just mind-blowing. And then I'd listen to other stuff and I'd go, it's okay. Yeah. And it wasn't that Little Feat wasn't great, because Little Feat was great.
Right.
But that Day at the Dog Races just hit me unlike anything else.
There are so many records that are like that, and so many bands had their peaks, and I think, to string together 5 or 6 or 7 great albums. Now you're talking about Billy Joel and Elton John and the Beatles and few, not even the Allman Brothers have that many albums. The Allman Brothers, at the end of the day, have like 3 great albums, right? And it's interesting in the sense that we have this image of just being this always good music all the time, no matter what, and then you get that clinker. And you go like, oh, guys, maybe you should have thought this one through a little better, you know? And that I was like Kansas again. And then when their 1980 album, I think it was Audio Visions, might have been the name of it. I don't remember it. It was so dreadful. And I'm sorry, guys, but it was so dreadful that I was just done.
They might even agree with you on that one.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I think Styx was that way.
Styx was another
to a
one.
certain point.
Yeah.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I remember the later.
Love Beach.
Yeah.
Love Beach was a bit of a problem for me.
Because I'm a guy who, Trilogy, Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Trilogy fits in my top 10 of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. And same as we mentioned with Brain Salad Surgery for me, but then when Love Beach came out, you're like, I think you're
really,
guys.
Yeah. Really? I go back to Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Trilogy. I was playing in a band for a very short period of time. I don't remember if I quit it or they fired me, but it's not relevant at this point. I was in high school. And the trumpet player, a guy named Ken Bassano, we've stayed in touch over the years, he introduced me to this Emerson, Lake and Palmer Trilogy, and they played it on a stereo system that, I was like, okay, I want that stereo system, And I remember the very first part of it, and I just went, once again, boom, mind-blowing. And it's so difficult. But, at the same time, Grand Funk Railroads, I guess you'd call it their Paranoid album, is their red cover.
The red one, yeah.
Same thing for me. And when you go back and you listen to that, the production wasn't that great on it.
Some of those, yes.
I remember Don Brewer, the drummer, his tempo was a little kind of centipede at one point.
And his drums sound a little bit like pie plates, which was a problem for me,
back in those days. But I've never grown tired of listening to these days.
Right. My album of that is Black Oak, Arkansas's first album.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it was just these guys were so scary, and they were so far out, and they were so cool, and they were so intriguing, and some of the music was so brilliant, and other parts of the music on the same album were so bad, right? But you kind of follow that path, and then they did a couple of great albums, and then they kind of went really, really bad, and it was one of those things. Later in life, I had a chance to become friendly with one of the members of the band, and with the chief songwriter, Ricky Lee Reynolds, and who's since passed away. But it was an arc for me in my life because it was one of the very first albums I picked up on my own. I fell in love with the band. I remember seeing them on California Jam. Remember California Jam, right?
Yeah.
In 1974 and the whole bit. And it was this big music festival. And then they kind of fell really out of favor, and they become kind of corny and kind of weird, but I had allegiance to them because they had spoken to me. So I would weather the storm of people going like, really, dude, that's what you're listening to? And I was like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay because I like them, and it's good enough. So
here's my useless trivia for the day.
I love your useless trivia, by the way. I actually do.
Yeah, every once in a while I'd find stuff I put on Facebook. Here's your useless trivia for the day. Musical trivia for the day. 1977, December 8th, 1977. Oh, my God.
We're doing dates now.
I still have the backstage pass.
Oh.
I was hired to be the production runner to pick up the bands at the local civic auditorium, or at the local hotel, and take them to the local civic auditorium.
Okay.
And the two bands were Blue Oyster Cult, and Black Oak, Arkansas.
No kidding, yeah.
So I had those guys in. Now get this, in the back of my mom and dad's Plymouth station wagon. Remember the wood paneling we talked about? Yeah. And I went, I don't know who these guys are, but they're really cool.
Yeah.
And I remember they had an old Greyhound bus.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one that was kind of the split
they had
level.
The little step to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was their tour. And I picked them up at the hotel, and I took them to the auditorium, and then I just sat backstage and watched the show, and then took them back to the hotel.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's really the night that I said, I got to be in the music business.
I want to be in this business.
Yeah, I want to be in this business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's such a great story. It's like I saw them in Asbury Park, was the very first show that I ever saw. And then a few years later, I saw the Allman Brothers. And Dickie Betts was one of my greatest all-time stories. He was with a girl, and it had a Volkswagen Beetle, but the back seat was gone, and it was filled with cases of Budweiser beer. And I'm hanging out with a couple of friends. It was a ramp to go up into Convention Hall. And if you don't know, it's an old theater. It was right on the beach in New Jersey, and it was just a fabulous place.
So this isn't the Stone Pony?
No, this is 4 blocks up. And it's actually out on the beach. It would seat maybe 2,500 people, right? So it was a full on auditorium. And this was Allman Brothers' reunion tour in '79 in Light and Rogues. And me and the guy that I went to the show with were standing out by the ramp, and he's beeping a horn at us because we were in the way, right? So we realize it's Dickie Betts, right? So we're not getting out of the way. We're not going to get out of the way. We're going to make you talk to us or do something, right? And so he's giving us beers out of his Budweiser. He had cases of Budweiser in the back of the Volkswagen, and we were, for this 1 second, we're like, dude, you're letting us backstage, right? He didn't. He couldn't be bothered. He wanted us to get the heck out of his way and move on.
Get away from me, kid. You're bothering me.
So here's a beer going. Exactly right. But there was a connection, and it was just so cool. It was just a fun thing that happened, and I don't know that happens anymore because I just don't know. I don't know if it's unapproachable or it's too approachable now.
You brought it up. It's the bean counters. It's the accountants.
Yeah.
It's the attorneys. It's become a business.
Right.
Not that it was never a business.
Right, but it was a bit of more of a lifestyle.
And
than
it was
business.
a creative business.
Yeah.
Now it's about how many units can you sell or stream or followers. The good news is the doors have opened for the independent artist.
Yes.
And we have Americana Fest next week here in Nashville.
Yep.
And just the number of independent artists that are going to be in town. Music that I've never heard of, I'm looking forward to listening to. But I still don't think it's going to match that classic rock era.
I don't think it can. Right, and it goes back to what you alluded to as we got started, and it's kind of as we wind down, everything is either so saturated that everything has become elevator and supermarket music. Yep. Or we're so, people are not willing to maybe just sit and listen to an album. They'll play a video game, or they'll watch 300 channels.
Too many distractions.
Yeah. Right. To kind of sit and just listen. Now, part of my career, which I've been very blessed to have a career like yourself in the music industry, in a wonderful thing is to kind of watch the trends. And what I can say is it is coming. People are getting interested. It is coming back. They're getting interested in that experience because they realize what goes on in their own human brains and minds and souls and stuff when they listen to it.
Right.
And that's a magical thing. So it's never going to go away. And Napster was in some ways the absolute worst thing that ever could happen to music. And it was also some of the best things that could ever happen to music, right? Yeah. And so we're 18 years, we're 20 years out. So we're still learning how to deal with, technology and all, and we'll get there. And I hope, so, like I said, I hope there's a kid out there that goes, watch this Jack and Bob, because I'm going to change the world with this, and people will fall on, and that would be so awesome.
Don't approach it from the point of proving us wrong. Prove yourself right.
Prove yourself right, man. Yeah, because I'm going to
then bring it to us.
Yeah, because I'm going to be behind you going, dude, man, I am so excited for you. And that's why this stuff needs to not be just put on the trash heap of generational disregard of that's old, who cares, and it's not, it's the old days. No, it's an important thing. Learn from it, change the world your own way, in your own time, but look at these people that did that already once before and now do it better and do it different.
We're going to do this again, right?
It will be banging on your door, my friend.
I think we have at least 3 or 4 more topics of discussion.
I am banging on your door, because we didn't even talk about live shows or anything yet. Yeah.
All right, we're going to do this again. Jack Sharkey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really a sincere career highlight for me. I'm having a blast.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.